Hi everybody! Welcome to week 2 of the summer session rapid version of CAT125R. We'll be covering Unit 3 and Unit 4 this week, which will focus on building your public reputation and appealing to audiences. So it was great to hear from so many of you last week. I found out that we are going to be having participants from many different countries this summer. So students will be participating in class sessions via the Adobe Connect rooms from Canada, China, France, India, Israel, Japan, and Thailand. So make sure that you give your fellow students a warm welcome. I'm actually recording this video from Prague in the Czech Republic this week. But even though I'm 9 time zones away from UC San Diego, I encourage you to come visit me during my virtual office hours, where you can use the Adobe Connect technology to talk to me about the class. Perhaps you have a letter of recommendation that you need, or you want to talk about the personal statement assignment. There are a lot of ways that I can help you during my office hours, so come by Tuesday or Thursday at 12 noon to this address, ucoe.adobeconnect.com/elosh. And if you can't make it at that time, I'm also happy to schedule individual appointments. So it's been great to see that you're building social networks, which is good given that social networks will be one of the themes for this week in the course. One of the interesting things that you'll notice about interaction is that we have both networked social interaction using the technology platform Piazza, and then we have one way, more isolated interaction using the technology of Zaption. So it's interesting to sort of hear how you're thinking about both the one-to-one mentoring and writing that you're going to be getting in this course, and also the many-to-many kinds of social networked activities that we'll be using in order to improve your feedback experiences. So many of you are aware of social networks. One of the things that social network sites like Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram make more visible is the fact that we are related to multiple people, and that those that there might be particular concentrations of people around particular hubs, but that you might be related to many different kinds of affinity groups, many kinds of social actors. And those connections between people are now a little more visible than they were before the advent of networked computerized technologies. However, there's still a lot to be learned. James Fowler, who is an expert on social networks and a UCSD faculty member, talks about the ways that social network research can be applied to our own communicative activities, so that you can learn how to think about theories of what's sometimes called infection or viral communication as ways to understand also how your messages could be transmitted more effectively through social networks, and also how things like reputation, trust, credibility function as socially networked functions apply. One of the studies that Fowler talks about in some depth is a study that we actually won't be reading because it's not available in an open access format, but it's Mark Granovetter's Strength of Weak Ties, which is an important article that looks at how job seekers take advantage of those who might have many, many more connections than people with whom you have strong ties, like family members or close friends. And we'll talk about some of these ideas in connection also with the personal statement assignment. Because your personal statement assignment is essentially about communication with weak ties. And you'll have to think about things like, what is the trust level that you're establishing? And you might find that your communicative strategies that you use with your social networks of peers might be very different from, say, more high prestige affiliates. So you might have, say, faculty members in your social network or employers, and your relationship with them will be a little bit different in terms of trust and credibility questions than it might be with your peers. The other factor that we'll be thinking about as we begin to think about the science of social networks and how it relates to rhetorical activities like writing a personal statement is that you need to be aware that not all of those social ties will be visible. In other words, what you write to this particular audience in the personal statement assignment, you might not be aware of how those people are connected to each other and also how they're connected to your mentors who are going to be writing letters of recommendation. And so this question of establishing credibility, you're going to be establishing it partly through the personal statement. You would be establishing it partly through the kinds of letters of recommendation that are written on your behalf. But it's also going to be important to have some knowledge about how particular professional networks, particular kinds of academic networks function, and even how certain kinds of peer-to-peer social networks among certain kinds of policymakers and power brokers function. So what are the audience expectations for a personal statement? Well, number one is writing ability. They want you to express yourself clearly and in a captivating way. They want to know about your major areas of interest. They want to know about relevant research or work experience, your educational background, your immediate and long-term goals, your reasons for deciding to pursue a particular field, your maturity, your motivation and commitment, the realism of your expectations, and also your personal uniqueness. So what would you personally add to the diversity of a company workforce or the entering class in graduate or professional school? So there are many different kinds of expectations that you're going to have to balance in the personal statement assignment. And the more that you think about these lessons about social networks, I think the better you'll do. The other thing that you're going to be thinking about is appealing to audiences. So when you think about terms like background, experience, maturity, commitment, motivation, and realism, all of those things are going to be attested to by other individuals so that you're establishing your social credibility. And that social credibility isn't just going to come from you telling the audience about why you have these qualities, but it's also going to depend on you showing that. And one of the things that's very important to remember about the personal statement is that you want to not just present yourself as a passive spectator. So sometimes people in personal statements, they write very interesting, vivid stories in which they actually don't intervene in the activity at all. So they're very good at showing, which we say show don't tell in order to do vivid writing. But the problem is they're not really showing their leadership ability, or they're not necessarily showing their ability to interact in a situation in which showing caring, intelligence, commitment, courage, personal qualities that would be valued in these different situations. Right? You're not actually displaying your abilities if you're just vividly depicting the scene. So try to think about the ways that you not only describe a scene, but also how you show your own social relationships, how you show your own interpersonal skills, because those so-called soft skills are going to be very important. So in terms of thinking about these interpersonal skills, in one of the lecture videos, we talked about the difference between Alexei Vayner and James Katecki, who are both seniors from prestigious institutions. Vayner was at Yale, Katecki was at Georgetown, and one of them achieved the good kind of internet fame, and the other achieved the disastrous kind of internet fame. So Vayner presented the wrong genre, he addressed his audience inappropriately, he invited challenges to his credibility from internet spoilers, he demonstrates his obliviousness to the fact that his social networks have been compromised. And in contrast, we see someone like James Katecki, who goes on to become a kind of internet celebrity in a good way and actually use it as a way to launch his career rather than derail his career as Vayner did. Katecki, we see, demonstrates an awareness of specific genres. He addresses multiple audiences expertly and simultaneously, and we'll be talking some about addressing multiple audiences in this week. He enhances his credibility by using the rhetorical scene to his advantage, and he capitalizes on social network sites and online video response structures. So there are ways that he really facilitates two-way communication with his audience. Now then we'll also talk about what it means to juggle multiple identities. So what do you do if you have more than one identity and you have to figure out how to tell a coherent story about those multiple identities, which many people have to do in the personal statement assignment. So we talk about the example of Vicky Zoe, who has to balance her identity as a scientist entrepreneur, which she mostly shows on LinkedIn, with her identity as a competitive ballroom dancer, which she mostly shows on Facebook. And one of the interesting things is that Vicky creates a coherent story, despite the fact that there's this contrast between the kind of femininity and physicality and artistic nature and emotional and playful nature of her work as a competitive ballroom dancer, while her life as a scientist really is about being very gender neutral and intellectual and scientific and logical and serious. But she brings these stories together by emphasizing the fact that she's a disciplined, competitive, social, and collaborative person, whether she's on the ballroom dance floor or in the lab. So let's take a look at some specific strategies for the personal statement. The first important strategy is to support your assertions. So let's take a look at an example. Gaining experience within different fields allows me to take a holistic and well-rounded approach to business. Through my surgical laboratory assistant position at the UCSD School of Medicine, I have firsthand experience in the methods that are behind research and developing a new technology. After being part of the research aspect of technology, I pursued a business development intern position with Allele Biotechnology, a small up-and-coming biotechnology company. While I was using Brainbow, a fluorescent protein-based technology in the laboratory, I was learning how to market and sell similar technology to various researchers and pharmaceutical companies. Much to my surprise, there was a distinct disconnect between researchers and technology that could accelerate their experiments. The duality of both positions allowed me to see the development and business side of technology and the importance of bridging that gap. Now here we see a case where the writer has really supported assertions. Another thing I like about this sample personal statement is the writer really demonstrates the writer's maturity. Now one thing that I'll point out that can be problematic about personal statements is a lot of times people feel like they have to organize them chronologically. So someone will start at the very beginning, right, with a story about being a very young child. And the problem with telling a story about yourself as a young child is you might unintentionally make yourself sound more juvenile than you'd like. In this case, the person is really strongly supporting assertions with examples that really demonstrate maturity. And it's nice because at the same time, this person is making connections between the world of academia and the world of business in ways that are compelling. So let's take a look at another strategy, which is to provide relevant detail. So let's take a look at this excerpt from a personal statement from a CAT125R student. This student writes, "As a student, I've also had several opportunities to develop my project management skill set. I am now in my 4th year with both the UCSD Autonomous Airplane Team and the Near Space Ballooning Team, and have served in various leadership positions. I am particularly proud of my 2-year project management role for the Autonomous Airplane Team, a multidisciplinary undergraduate competition team that develops a drone capable of autonomous navigation and automatic target identification. Under my direction, a diverse team of aerospace, mechanical, structural, electrical, and computer science engineering students is producing a fully functional autonomous airplane. To meet our large project budget, I have successfully sought out business and government funding for the program. So you can see this writer really uses supporting details effectively. We have a whole list of different kinds of team members who are participating in the project. The writer supports the assertion about leadership by pointing to a particularly memorable instance of which he or she is particularly proud. So we're told that there's kind of this specific instance that supports the generalization, and then we're given a lot of detail for that support. Now, personal strategy 3, account for anomalies, is important, but I really like this example because one of the things that this person does is you don't want to undermine yourself. And unfortunately, sometimes when people account for anomalies, they fall into that TMI problem, right? They give the person too much negative information. You really want to keep the tone of your personal statement as positive as possible. And often, you don't really need to tell them about failures or setbacks or cases in which you feel like you failed. That's not necessarily information that the reader needs to know, and it might just undermine your position if other peers don't spend quite as much time accounting for anomalies as you do. But I like this example of accounting for anomalies because I think it sets that good positive tone. So the writer writes, "The best music educators I have observed are those whose duties and expertise extend beyond that of their musical niche. For example, a casual conversation about using social media to disseminate promotional materials digress to how sports activities can promote choir bonding when used appropriately. I steadily realized that my late start in music studies was not a permanent crutch, and that my experience with various academic subjects was beneficial. Mathematics helped me develop a critical eye for music analysis, and psychology of perception suggested that left-handed students tend to organize pitches differently than that of right-handed students. They contributed toward an interdisciplinary approach to music education." So in this case, the student is emphasizing how the later entry into music education actually had a positive side. Right? The student has a more interdisciplinary approach than someone who might have had a much more single-track focus. And the writer turns that into a strength. So let's look at one more strategy. This strategy is explaining the program's appeal. So this example, the student says, "The clinical psychology program at UCLA would train me to become a psychologist with strong foundations in both research and clinical practice. In particular, I am interested in working with Dr. Jan Blotcher, whose expertise in children with autism is similar to my research interest. Also, Dr. Bruce Baker's interest in developmental psychopathology and effective intervention programs overlap with my interest area. In UCLA Clinical Psychology Program, it should be in the UCLA Clinical Psychology Program, of course, I hope to gain research and clinical experience in autism treatment for young children." So this is nice in that the writer has clearly done his or her homework. Now, one problem I would point out is that it's better to emphasize the strengths of the program rather than particular people. Because remember that particular faculty members might not necessarily be there when you arrive, right? They might move on to another institution. They might be on sabbatical. They might not be working with first or second year students. So tying your admission too much to particular people can be a risky strategy. But what I like about this is that clearly there's expertise about the field and the strengths of the program. Now, another thing to keep in mind, of course, is you want to not just talk about why you need them, but why they need you, right? So keep the focus on what you're adding to their student body, not just why you might be particularly in need of their services. So in this unit, we'll be talking about some basic questions for engaging with publics. The questions are, what is the message? Who is behind the message? Who is the audience for the message? And what is the message intended to accomplish? Now, in the lecture videos, I give examples of ways to think about each one of these questions, but you can also think about these questions with the personal statement assignment. So for example, my intrinsic passion for fairness and order, coupled with my analytical and objective leadership ability, serve as constant reminders that I have been brought up to succeed at a high level in the field of law. Now, I really like certain features of this excerpt. I like the fact that the writer is actually modeling this sophisticated mode of thinking, right? So there's fairness and order that make the professional law attractive. This person has analytical and objective abilities. And we're told that this is someone who succeeds at a high level. So definitely someone who communicates ambitious, extroverted, energetic delivery. The two cautions I might have might be watch out for passion, because it is an overused word. So saying my intrinsic passion, it might feel a little bit like a cliche. You might also want to watch out for the journey of life. That's another one that maybe they hear too often in personal statements. The other thing to watch out for is, again, telling, not showing, right? Just saying you have leadership ability without backing it up with specifics might make your audience a little bit more suspicious. Now let's take a look at another example in terms of thinking about these questions of what's the message, who's behind the message, who's the message intended for, and what's the message intended to accomplish. So most, if not all, of the pressing environmental issues we face are extremely dynamic. They are dependent upon many different variables, and there's usually not just a single defined solution. Therefore, leaders who can bring a dynamic interdisciplinary approach will have the greatest chance to solve them in the most efficient way possible. I want to pursue a master's in environmental science and resource science and management with a specialization in coastal marine resources management at the Bren School, because I'm confident that I'm one of those leaders. Now, what's interesting is this is a case in which the student is starting with the personal qualities that might be advantageous on a generic level, and then moving to what this individual has to contribute on a personal level as a discrete contributor. So in other words, this one is actually going from the general requirements to this person's specific strengths, while the other one sort of starts with the person's specific strengths and then applies it to the sort of general situation. One of the things I really like about this is the strength of the language, right? Pressing, dynamic. We're given a situation in which there are many different variables and not just a single defined solution. And we know that this person is capable of a sophisticated interdisciplinary approach. The one thing I might point out, however, is there's a little bit of repetition, right? There are two dynamics in this paragraph. So make sure to carefully review your personal statement to watch out for repetition or dropped words, because that's certainly possible to do. So when you're thinking about what the message is, that's going to be your controlling idea or thesis statement of your personal statement. Who's behind the message? That's your opportunity to construct your ethos. And you're going to construct that ethos, that credibility and authority, through concrete detail. Who's the audience for the message? You want to research the individual programs and institutions to which you're applying. What's the message intended to accomplish? To inform and persuade, or even better, to persuade by informing. So you don't want to seem like you're putting on too strong a sales pitch. You want to seem like you're a credible source of information about your own accomplishments. So a couple of reminders for the week as we wrap up. Make sure to keep up your participation on Piazza. It's wonderful to hear your responses to the videos. Make sure you have access to a webcam and microphone for your weekly section meetings. I know there were a few hiccups the first week, but hopefully we've gotten them all worked out with Adobe Connect. Watch the required lectures and do the Zaption tour. Very important. And I hope to see you all in office hours. Bye.